Our next speaker will shed some light on this wonderful topic, the strategic topic, and also perhaps the need for a platform for this work. Please welcome Josef Öhman, Associate Professor from the Technical University of Denmark.
Thank you very much. All right. The last speaker before the break. If you ever organize these events, you know that this is the worst spot to put somebody. So thank you, Ulf, for trusting in my abilities to get the audience over to the coffee break. Very excited to be here, and thanks for having me. My name's Joseph, and I'll be talking about strategy implementation. Now, I'm in a way a funny person to talk about strategy implementation because my background is in mechanical engineering and product development and systems engineering and managing large aerospace and defense and construction projects. But sometimes it helps in research if you don't know a whole lot about the subject that you're looking into, because instead of going to all the executives and saying, here's my idea of how you should run your company, and can we try this? You can actually take a step back and say, how do you do that? How do you deal with uncertainty? And that is a bit my specialty, is looking into risk and uncertainty. And that is why PMI and the Brightline Initiative asked me 2 years ago to start working with them. And here's a little challenge for the people doing the AV production. Before this goes online, you need to insert the slide here that has the Brightline logo. That will be in your handouts, but it's not on these slides here. So they very, very generously have been sponsoring this research and doing a lot of great work around closing sort of the strategy implementation gap. One of the surprise findings of our research with the senior executives was that we ended up talking a lot about digitalization. So 2 years ago, this was not a digitalization project. But when we went into the organizations, and particularly the senior executives, and we said, let's talk about strategy, let's talk about your risks and uncertainties, let's talk about how you manage that. One of the big surprises was that practically all of them started talking about digitalization initiatives on two sides. One, you digitize your product or service, so you digitize what faces your customer. On the other side, you digitize how you work internally or how you work in your supply chain. And for me, that was also a bit of a journey, because I thought, I'm not that old, I know about all this digital stuff. I've grown up with it until I started talking to people who have teenagers. And there is a long list of hugely popular apps out there that I'd never heard of. And in a way, that was a similar situation that the executives were looking at, because they said, well, you know, Joseph, I have 50 years of experience in the construction industry, and that used to be a good thing. Would you hire somebody today so that I have 50 years experience in this? I'm not sure. I think the experience is good, and as I'm getting older, I'm saying that more and more. Go for the folks with the experience. But the truth also is, that a lot of stuff's happening around digitalization. And I asked myself, why did this come up? Is this really, truly disruptive? What do you guys think? Why did all the CEOs, CFOs say, oh, you want to hear about risk? Let's talk about digitalization. Is that really the biggest risk? Ulf saying yes. Yeah, I think that is actually spot on, because our organizations are built around the risks and the uncertainties that we've seen for a long, long time. So we know, when I talk to Maersk Oil, their biggest risk isn't digitalization, their biggest risk is the oil price. They know that, well, they're now Total, so longer story there. They'd claim it as a success. But the whole organization is built around those risks and those uncertainties, and we're really, really good at dealing with them, because that's what all of our processes are built to handle. And if we're still there as a company after the startup phase, then I think we've figured out how to do that. I think there's a lot about talk about digitalization because people just don't know. Just honestly don't know what does that mean for my organization and my business and my processes and my customers. So that is also a big business opportunity, by the way, because I've also seen a lot of companies along the way that help you deal with this digitalization. And I think Ortelius is a good example of that. I'll be coming to another one, IBM, who's also making good money out of helping people not necessarily digitize, but figure out what does digitalization mean for your business. So, and then this question: if you're the executive, if you're in charge, aren't you not supposed to know everything? You know, how can you guide your company if you don't know everything? And then the sort of the money question is, well, if I don't know everything, if I get to that point of admitting that I may not know everything, how often am I allowed to get it wrong? And that was really the starting point here, and I'm happy to report that sort of most of there are of course these characters that like to pretend that they know everything, but that's usually what happens in the first half an hour when you meet them, and then as you get talking, you know, you do get to the point they say, you know, to be honest, here's all the stuff that we don't know. And that was really the starting point for the conversations that we had with them. And so I started asking them sort of this really simple question: if you don't know everything, if you can't just put together all these beautiful plans and start executing them, what is it that you do? All right. And when you work on the executive level, no matter what you do, the result is always a 2x2. I learned that. I had a 4-dimensional model at the beginning. I said, they're not going to fly. Yeah, you get 4 quadrants. Make this fit into 4 quadrants, and so we did. So this is our structure, and this is literally what I'll be talking about now for the remainder of the time that we have. Is the 4 categories of activities that these executives talked about. Is what do we do as an organization when we look at uncertainty? And the example that most of them had, what are the 4 categories of things that we do talking about digitalization? The 2x2 has 2 axes. One is the degree of uncertainty. That's why I feel very comfortable talking to them about risk and uncertainty and all the things we don't know and how we manage that. And then the second surprise, other than that they all wanted to talk about digitalization, they also all wanted to talk about people. They said, Joseph, I'd love to talk about risk with you, but I can't talk to you about risk without talking about people. So eventually I said, okay, you're also allowed to talk about people. And then we have basically these 4 quadrants where we have 4 sets of activities with high, low uncertainty and high and low people impact. And we're going to walk through them. The first category is discovery. Where do, in this case, not babies come from, but where do new ideas come from in our organization? Then the experimentation. How do I figure out what works and what doesn't work for me, and what are the different dimensions here? How do we learn? Then transformation. Now we know what's happening, we know what works, what doesn't work. How do we get that out into the organization? And then Excel, or operations excellence. You know, we're making good money here. How do we get better and better at it step by step? So let's go through that. The first dimension here is the degree of uncertainty. And that is one of the key takeaways from me. Sort of, what are the categories of things that the executives don't know when it comes to digitalization? The first one is, you could say, easy, technology. And I sometimes get the feeling that when we talk about digitalization, that's sort of where we start, but then where we also finish. That we say, blockchain, don't know what that's going to do for our business. Or artificial intelligence, yes, maybe not. Or Tuve was talking about new database structures. Maybe that solves all my problems. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it scales, maybe it doesn't. So one aspect. The next one, which I would argue is I think I'm going to say it's the most important one, is the market. assuming that we get the technology to work, assuming that we get either this new digital or this digitized product out in the market, are people going to buy that? And there's a great example, a sad, great example for that recently, and I can talk about it because it was in the news. Anyone here from the construction industry? Yeah, good. Anybody here working for MT Højgaard? Good. MT Højgaard was doing exactly the right thing for 10 years when it comes to digitization. They read all the reports. They all said, oh, it's all about building information modeling. It's all about virtual design and construction. So not just the digital twin of our organization, but also digital twin of the building that we're creating and the digital twin, how people are going to use it, and of the design process and how we interact with everybody in this messy construction supply chain. So they invested heavily in that for 10 years. They built departments around that. And then after 10 years, they were done, and they went to their customers and they say, what do you think? And the customer said, oh, that's awesome. And, well, you can buy it. I said, oh, I'd like to take it for free. Can I have it for free? And MT said, no, I'm sorry, it's kind of expensive. And the customer said, oh, okay, great, then let's just keep doing it the old-fashioned way. So MT just closed down these departments, millions and millions and millions down the drain at this point. I'd argue there was a bit of competence built up there, so maybe they can use that again at some point. But market uncertainty when it comes to digital solutions, a gigantic challenge. Because it's, you know, it's from the very beginning of digitalization. If, you know, would your users have articulated their need for digital word processing software? Probably not. They would have asked you for a typewriter that jams less often, you know, that can store little snippets, and that is the stuff that we have. And that's what makes my life very hard when I teach design and innovation, that, you know, sometimes you shouldn't ask the user, because you can't ask the user, because the user can't tell you what it is that he or she wants until you put it in their face, and they can say, oh, I want that. Oh, I don't want that. Tuvet, the nice example, sorry for stealing that, when Google went around asking people, do you care about the colors of the text in your search result pages? They said, nah, not important. And then they ran experiments, and they had different colored results, and they used different colors to highlight different aspects of the search results, and guess what? It mattered a lot. So people are sometimes very, very bad at articulating their requirements and their expectations of things that they're not familiar with. And since most of the business models around digitalization, even internally, if you digitize your processes, if you go to your CEO and say, do we need this Ortelius solution? They say yes or no. They probably don't know what they're saying until you show them the prototype and say, here is the mock-up of what that would look like. And how does that connect back, as Marcus has said, to the value that we create? How does that help us do a better job at, you know, how we make money in this organization? So that's the market uncertainty here. And then the third one, capabilities. And that basically means if you know that artificial intelligence is for you and there's a market for it, do I have the capabilities inside my own organization to pull this off? The answer is probably going to be no. And then the question is, okay, what's the gap? Now, what kind of skills do we need to hire in? What kind of skills do we need to develop? And what is the uncertainty around that? And that is sort of these three dimensions of uncertainty that the executives were thinking about when we're talking about digitization of their businesses. Then the second dimension is the people impact. Here, to what degree do these strategic initiatives around digitalization impact the people? And there are basically two dimensions here. One is how many people are impacted, because we all know that people work and politics gets messier and messier the more people are involved. So it's a good metric to think about, okay, just how many people do I need to pick up here and will be using that system and may agree or disagree with what's happening here. And the second dimension is how afraid are they of what you're doing? And that is actually quite a profound factor. That, you know, good luck getting a digitization initiative underway, which is happening nowadays more and more, where you're aiming for sort of the white collar jobs. We're working with a consultancy that said, well, we actually had a little prototype where we use an artificial intelligence system to do a kind of analysis task database for our clients to optimize their production. And usually we bill, 3 people for 3 months for that. But I can tell you now we can do it with that software, in 3 days, just by sort of loading the data in there, having a few people massage that, and then getting the results out. It is very, very tricky to communicate and to sort of build a story around where we suddenly should all get excited about, productivity improvement that's going to threaten our jobs. And that is, I think, not a new challenge, but I think it's a new challenge for digitalization. It is not always about growing the pie. That is the nice scenario where it's a new product and a new offering and a new market, and we're competing against non-consumption because nobody's doing this, and we're going to have more work as a result. But they're saying, but there's so much exciting stuff we can do about process automation internally and master data, removing all that friction. But, today it's somebody's job to take care of that friction. Yeah? So don't expect them to be excited by you rocking up and say, oh, your stupid work, that's going to disappear in the future. So these 2 dimensions, how many people are affected and just how afraid are they for their jobs and their livelihood and their ability to pay the mortgage, should you be successful with what you do. Am I making sense so far? We're all still awake. It's good. All right, let's look at the quadrants. So the first one, the discovery work, that is basically the question of how, not just for digitalization, but our examples here are from that area. Where do the ideas come from? Industry that I've worked with a lot around that is manufacturing. You may have heard of Industry 4.0, or Internet of Things. And right now, where do most executives get their ideas from around that? What do you think? Where would I like to get my ideas from if I was an executive? Pardon? Oh, that's boring. Customers, maybe that's a smart answer, but let's see a third one. Existing contacts. I'm getting there. Playing golf. Yeah, that's what I was going for. A lot of initiatives are started because guy or gal walks into the office in the morning and says, "No, I was talking to Frank over the weekend, and they're doing this massive AI thing. I think we should get into AI as well." And that is the extent of the strategic thing. And maybe you've picked up one of these airport self-help literature books, how to make digitization work for you in 15 days or so. And, it tells you the stories of how people have been totally successful about that. I think this is a massively neglected area of strategy work when it comes to digitalization. Putting a process in place or a structure or whatever you like to call it, to help us in a structured way figure out, screen what's out there, understand what's happening on the technology landscape, understand what's happening with our customers, understand what's happening with our competitors. We do it for everything else. Every time, the first customer of any Audi car is always BMW, yeah? And the other way around. It's called competitive vehicle analysis. Yeah? They bring them in, and the person who knows the most about an Audi vehicle is a BMW engineer, and the other way around, because that is where you stay in touch with what's happening. Would be nice if we did that in the digital world as well, and observe, see what they're doing, and trying to figure out why they do it. Now, there are different ways of going about it. So a nice example of what we do in Denmark is called MADE, a Manufacturing Academy of Denmark. Here we have a couple of hundred small, medium, and large manufacturing organizations that all came together and say, we all need to figure this out. So let's organize events together. Let's show one another what we're doing. Let's invite international experts. Let's sponsor research. That's the part that I like the most, of course, around figuring out how can we move our organizations into a digital future. Because at some point, yes, it is a competitive advantage, and you don't want to share everything. But at the end of the day, particularly when it comes to digitalization, it's usually the weakest link in your supply chain that limits your pace. So there is also an argument for looking at that, as an industry together, and maybe even together with your competitors, of thinking, how can we move this ahead? The UK is doing that for construction. They have a national initiative to be, the best construction sector worldwide, embracing sort of digital technologies. And they go together because they say, well, we're all competitors here, but at the end of the day, we're also all competing internationally for contracts. So if our supply chain can figure this out, at the end of the day, we'll have a bigger pie, even if we're in the same competitive situation as before, and we'll have a better business. What are you guys doing in terms of discovery work? Who plays golf? I don't actually. I like the idea. Yes, so, some people do at the end here. Give me an example. Networking, yeah. That's a nice way of saying playing golf. Yes, well, I went there and networked. You may get that through accounting and to reimburse your expenses for that. Yeah. Coming to Ortelius events like this, I think is a great thing to do, whether you like the product or buy it or the services, but I think it's a good way of figuring out what's going on. Thinking about road mapping exercises, maybe not doing that just on your own, but with your supply chain partners, with your maybe even your competitors. IBM will sell you this. It's also, I think, a very clever business model. We work sometimes with Klaus Klint. He is IBM Director of Internet of Things. I think it's an awesome title. I'd like to be Director of Internet of Things. But what they'll do, they'll sell you this as a service. And they'll say, you can come to our smart building in Munich, and we've stuffed every imaginable piece of technology into that building, and every algorithm, that we could find is happening there. And for a small fee, we'll take you around, and we'll give you a little lecture, and we'll do a workshop, with your people to figure out what's out there. So you'll get all of these slides here. Let me sort of take one step back. And then one of the things that IBM does very well in the discovery phase, according to Klaus, that is, but I believe him, is sort of asking 3 questions. And that is connecting back to the business value, making that more concrete. Question 1, you have an idea there, and now you have 3 options. Option 1 is it helps us save money. So we go up in our productivity. Option 2 is it helps our client save money, because then we can, offer service there. Option 3 is it allows us to do something that we could not do before. That's the ideal case, because then we grow the pie, we offer a service, or we offer a product that hasn't been out there. And this is not about a business case, because the worst thing you can do in the discovery phase is ask about a business case. Because then best case, you make up numbers. Worst case, you say, oh, there's a lot of things we don't know about it, we shouldn't pursue it. So not a business case, but articulate a story around a value proposition. And that is also something that Amazon does. Have you heard about the Amazon press releases? That is basically the first document that gets written when somebody has an idea. It's like, talk to me about your idea, show me the press release that you want to get out 4 years from now, 5 years from now. And why a press release? What do you talk about in a press release? Headlines, yeah. What's the most important stuff here? Yeah. News value, what's different? Yeah. What it does and what it does for your customer. In a press release, you're not going to talk about this admittedly fantastic new database structure that you invented, but all you do is going to talk about how, that Amazon Shared Services invention is going to help either, your client save some money, or you as the customer allows you to do something you couldn't do before. So it's a very nice way of storytelling, yeah? And it's not complicated. Everybody gets, once you've read 3 press releases, you get the structure. Yeah? It's not rocket science. It gives you flexibility to talk about your idea. And that is something that works in the discovery phase when you don't have the numbers. Because that is then what we do in experimentation. These are your notes slides for later. So, experimenting. This is, I think, an area where people are beginning to realize that they need to do more, but I think there's still a lot of opportunity for growth here. There are people who try to jump from discovery to transformation. Who has tried that? Oh, I have an idea. Let's do it. Let's roll it out. The government, the Danish tax authority's IT system, maybe. Because you can get really excited at the discovery stage. Oh, here's a great story. Let's just get it into the organization as quickly as we can, and then we learn along the way, and then it usually ends up in a gigantic mess at some point, because there's something that you need to figure out before you do that, and that is what we summarized in the experimenting, was basically a structured learning process around the 3 uncertainties that I talked about earlier. Asking 3 questions. What's all the things that we don't know about the technology that we should know? What are all the things that we don't know about the market that we should know? And what are all the things that we don't know about our internal capabilities that we should know? We heard the example earlier about the 15 people that knew something about biofuels out of 30,000. So that is something that you figure out here. And that is where you ask the hardest question first. And that is very counterintuitive to a lot of folks. Because if you're a good project manager, what do you do with the hardest question? When do you look at that? Yeah, that's a really good project manager. If you're a politically savvy project manager, yeah, you start with easy stuff. That comes much more naturally to you. That's why we talk a lot about technology when we should be talking about the market, because we get the technology stuff. It's less messy and we're more excited about it. And then you can report progress. So everything's going according to plan. And that's when we get the green light and the green light and the green light, and then at the last milestone we get the red light. Because we've pushed that big wave of risks and uncertainties in front of us and made sure that nobody, we don't touch that. We don't want a steering committee to interfere. We'll sort it out. And there's a good dose of optimism bias, which is great, because nobody would get out of bed in the morning, wasn't it for optimism bias? And then we find out the hard way that this doesn't fly. And with experimenting, if you do it right, you create an environment where it's okay to ask the hard questions early on and acknowledge that they're there. And also don't expect an answer right away, because it is part of your strategy work to figure out what does it mean for the market, how can we find out what the willingness to pay is for something without necessarily asking people, because they're terrible at answering questions like that, as we discussed earlier. And we've seen very good examples in the experimentation phase when it came to the use of, let's say, virtual reality for an engineering company. And sort of a checklist of 3 things that one of the executives shared with us. I'm going to do experimenting because it's one of the big questions as you move from discovery to experimenting is, which one of these 100 ideas am I going to pick? The first one, or the first screening question, was what we already talked about. Is there a story for a market impact here? Can I think about a press release? Not a business model, but a press release. The second question then, do I have somebody in my organization who's actually honestly excited about this? So is there something I can give this to, who's not going to say, oh no, not yet another thing, I already have enough to do, but who's going to say, finally, I've always wanted to work on AR, or artificial intelligence, and they'll come in on the weekends just because they're so excited. They finally are allowed to do that. And then the third question, first one is their market, second one, we have somebody who's excited about it. The third one, if everything goes wrong, are we going to lose the company? Or are we going to lose, I'm at least going to lose my job? And then box the financial investment to a level where you say, this is the amount of money I can play with and lose without the world coming to an end. So, and then sort of start the experimenting, and then, you do all the, any approach is welcome here. Fail fast, fail early, fail often is one of them, where we start with the hard stuff and say, can we solve the hard stuff? Because if we can't, then we don't need to waste our money and time solving the easy stuff. And there's a book that you can buy, The Lean Startup, which will on 250 pages tell you over and over and over and over and over again that you should, fail fast, fail early, fail often. That is what made Netflix great. We lived in the US when Netflix started, so I still got the DVDs in the mail. And I actually talked to one of the founders a year and a half ago, and he said, the secret of our success is that we figured out how to get better at experimenting. Because we discovered early on that we're really, 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 really bad at predicting what people want and like. You know, it's the worst stuff that we've done was the stuff when we try to, you know, think for people what they like. And then we did, you know, experiments every couple of months, and now we're doing tens, actually millions of experiments every day. And what convinced me is when they talked about where ideas for new shows come from. So if I went to you and said, oh, we've identified you're the perfect average Swedish citizen, what you like will sell well everywhere else in Sweden. So I'm listening to you now, you know, give me your requirements for the next big hit show on Netflix, 12 episodes. All right, start. Yeah? We made stuff up if we were in that situation, the same way that most of our customers would make stuff up if we put them in a situation asking them to, you know, give us the requirements for what they really, really want. What they do instead is experiments. They show you thousands of different shows, give you lots of opportunity to pick from, and then they do one thing. What do you do in Netflix? What's the option? It used to be a 1 to 5 star rating. That was too complicated. What can we do now? We can just like stuff. I think at this point we can't even dislike it. I think we can just like it. And that is the experiment. And done. And that is what they then can extract their list of requirements from a very, very data-driven way of what it is that they care about. So thinking about experimenting, how do you guys experiment? Is that something that you're allowed to? Yeah? Do you help people experimenting? Mm. The data-driven experimentation, in your experience, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or where are we with that?
It's much better than writing the script on your own,
Mm.
but still a long way to go.
Yeah. And again, I think really interesting opportunity here, because you can now make money or have a career as somebody who knows how to design these experiments. Because that's the fun stuff, you know, doing an ERP system versus a 4th generation jet fighter. You know, 4th generation jet fighter prototypes are really, really, really expensive. Software is still expensive, but not quite as expensive as a 4th generation jet fighter. When I was at MIT, we worked a bit on the F-35 program. It now was $1,000 billion over cost. Even for the US military, that is a lot of money. That's why we're now trying to sell it to every man and his dog. And Denmark bought 35 of them, so that is in the Pentagon. Because that covers this massive cost overrun. Because we did a lot of, we actually had a great idea that we do parallel development, and we do a lot of prototyping and testing as we develop the hardware. Turns out if you have a highly integrated system, that's difficult. Which brings me actually back to Tuve's point about data structures, because that is one thing that I've seen, and we want to be a little bit more technical. Right now, when we talk about digitalization with companies, I actually had a meeting last week with one of engineering consulting company, because they were thinking very, very hard about what to do with all this hardcore engineering digitalization that's happening, because that is very tricky. Because right now you have anything between 3 and 10 competing platforms, you know, that all have their own processes and software packages that all pay big attention to not quite working with other packages so that you're locked into their ecosystem. And nobody knows where that will go 5 or 10 years from now. So they've actually, they don't have the complete answer yet, but I think they've started asking the right question, because they said, how can we make trying these different solutions, how can we make that cheap and easy for us? And how can we get faster and faster and faster at adopting new technical solutions in our company. And some of that is sort of hardcore engineering stuff of, safety calculations around how much concrete you need where for a new bridge. And what they're working on is actually a model that looks almost exactly like what you've been presenting, where you say, well, we have these completely disconnected data repositories, and then we need a level of data integration, and then we start building, and that is sort of their argument right now. We're going to spend a lot more thought and money on the data model, and we're going to make the app development a lot cheaper and easier. And we're going to make really, really small apps. That's why they went away from calling it software or solutions. They're deliberately using the app metaphor to also explain to their engineers that this application can do one very particular specialized task for you. And instead of trying to do everything in your workflow, we're going to start with stuff that takes a lot of time and that is going to help you a lot. And we're going to make it really, really easy to develop these apps. And the idea is that at some point, 5-10 years from now, there will actually be people that have that skill set outside of IT, because the data model is so good that they can actually, almost as in a scripting language, do fairly complex sort of analysis and automation tasks on those apps. And I thought that was a really interesting way of sort of moving the experimentation actually to another level and starting to focus on the data model in order, not just because that is important, but because the idea is that's going to make our life a lot easier and actually allow us to experiment and be much quicker at doing a lot of small things, because they've basically given up on the one big solution, that's going to do everything. And they wanted, and they say, if we have a data model, that is actually okay, because we just do smaller things where they need it the most. And we're just going to get really good at doing that fast. Okay, so this was the right side of the house where we deal with new ideas. And it was actually quite interesting that when we did the interviews, that it was clear whether the executive was on this side, because they were the ones that came in with a new idea every day, that were all about startup and sort of trying things out and seeing if it works and working with the customer and getting the prototype going. But then we saw quite a few situations where we're actually experimenting, and we're saying, okay, so you had this fantastic experiment in that country with that technology and that client. How did that go? And then, gigantic success. After 2 years, we got it to work. Our people love it, the client love it, they're actually paying for it, and it's big success. And so, okay, when was that? 3 years ago. So, where are you now? I said, we're still doing it in that country. But you're active in 15 countries. What happened? I said, we really struggle sort of getting it out into the organization. And that was sort of something that I observed and talked to people, that you do have there are different mindsets in an organization. I think there needs to be, everybody talks about diversity, but I think there's a very, very good example where you do need people that are really good at the creative stuff, doing that in a structured way, figuring out what it is that the customer wants, how to get that to work. But then you also need people who just love operations, who just love the change management and to get the stuff done. And that is not necessarily, in my experience, that is not the same people that love the designerly innovative stuff. Few people were actually good at both, and I think people start appreciating more and more the differences here. But I think it is a truth in most organizations that it does require different people to take care of different aspects here. I'm going to be very brief about the transformation operations excellence, because that is, I would argue, the classic change management. I'm going to skip over your notes here. One of the things that we discovered in transformation is an oldie but goldie, that people tend to start a lot of initiatives in parallel, because they get excited and then they see what works. And then we actually, in our digital transformation agenda, have 15 different things that are going on in the organization. What does that do? Can you do 15 things at the same time? Maybe your PMO can, maybe the guy that you pay or the gal to keep an overview of all of that. But the people who actually have a job in your organization and they had a full plate in front of them before you started these 15 initiatives, they're going to say, what, I'm just going to keep my head down until this wave washes over, and then I'm going to stick out. Because, by the way, I'm busy making your money. So go away with your digital stuff. And one of my takeaways here was that, move from these long, thin projects to the short, fat ones, and do one at a time. And spend as much money on it as you possibly can. So make sure that the money is not the limiting factor here. If you decide to do something, if it's worth it, then spend all the money you've got on it and get it done. Because then you also have the success in the organization. And if you don't know how to get it done, then probably you're not in transformation, but you're still experimenting, which is fine. But then you're not ready to roll this out in your organization. The last point here, and then we're going to wrap up, is operations excellence, and that is really, really interesting, because that is something where the continuous improvement comes into play. So these are the kind of people that love 0.5%, 1%, 2%, 3% every year. I'm looking in the IKEA direction here, because it's a big thing. What makes you a long-term, viable company, that you do get better at what you do, one step at a time. And there is a lot of value to be gained here as well. I worked with BMW a couple of years ago on a big change management initiative around their engineering productivity that needed to go up 30%. Longer story. They didn't want to be bought by Volkswagen. That was the motivation here. And then Porsche got bought and created a bit of urgency. And then we thought that actually sort of the contributions you get from top-down initiatives, which may go sort of this way through discovery, experimentation, transformation, that is what gives you can give you a lot of value very quickly within a few years. But if you want to then sustain your productivity gains, you actually need to put you can call it quality management, you can call it operations excellence, you can call it lean, or whatever you like. But you need that, and you also need that on the digital side of things, because I think that's what we're all discovering, that whatever solution we put in place today is not the perfect solution sort of 5 years from now. And so here, so these activities around this that continuous improvement process. I'm going to finish up with a few pointers. You'll get those slides. We have a little booklet, 10, 12 pages, executive compatible. You have a big picture on one side and a little bit of text on the other. It's written for people that facilitate these kinds of workshops, thinking about the transformation agenda. These are some pictures that you have in your slides. We have an article with the World Economic Forum. How do you implement a strategy when interns know more than CEOs? Basically talking this digitalization story. There's a book chapter, with the London School of Economics. It has a series of articles from us on strategic management, some of it for digital, all of it relevant for the digital transformation. And from Brightline, there's also a little book that you can download. They actually have 2 books. We're about to release a 3rd book with them in November. This is generally about strategy implementation and leadership, but you'll find a lot of it relevant for your digital transformation journey as well. And with this little advertisement, I thank you very much for your kind attention.